Good morning. It's Friday, October 2nd, 2020, and it's 9:03 a.m. The October State Board meeting will now come to order. Andrea, please call the roll.
Deborah Neary. Here. Patsy Kojohns.
Here.
Lisa Fricke.
Here.
Maureen Nichols.
Here.
Rachel Wise.
Here.
Robin Stevens.
Here.
Patricia Tim.
Yes.
John Witzel.
Here.
Commissioner Bloomstead.
Present.
All present.
Thank you, Andrea. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Information regarding the Open Meetings Act is posted as you enter the room from the main hallway doors. The Open Meetings Act is also posted on the State Board of Education's website, www.education.ne.gov/stateboard. Live web streaming will be available through the State Board of Education's website, www.education.ne.gov/stateboard. Board members, please engage your microphones before speaking and turn them off when you are done speaking, and please turn off your cell phones or mute them. Thank you. Agenda item 1.4, COVID-19 meeting protocol. Dr. Four.
To do due diligence to our practices that we've put in place, I'll draw your attention again to the protocol that we've had reviewed by the Lincoln-Lancaster County Health Department. Very similar protocol to what we've engaged in before. And I've dropped my mask just to demonstrate again, if when you're talking and you're 6 foot away from someone and it's more comfortable to take your mask off at that point, you can. And then when you're finished speaking, put it back on. And the same would go for the public if you would like to take it off when you are speaking, if that's more comfortable. I don't think we're going to fill the room today, so we won't have a problem with that. And would just ask you again to take a look at the self-screen questionnaire, those 5 questions, and I'm sure you've already done that, but if you needed to exit the room, please do so.
Thank you, Dr. Four. We will now have public comment period. This period of public comment is available for any person who wishes to address the State Board on subjects within its authority. Please note that public comment should be on topics related to the State Board's constitutional and statutory authority. Thanks to the members of the public who attended today. We have no 10-minute special appearances today. We will now move to our 5-minute public comment period. I would like to remind you to sign up if you have not already done so. There are sign-in cards on a table outside of the meeting room. There are, if you look in your Spark, there are 2 written public comments. Please be sure to read those, one from T.J. Vancouver, and Dr. Four has indicated that he will be responding to him. There's another one from Marion Holstein. I thought she was going to be here, but I do not see her. And lastly, Sarah Scaretta will be joining us. Sarah, would you please come forward? You have 5 minutes.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to be in a meeting with people. It's really exciting. My name is Sarah Scaretta, and I'm the certification officer at the College of Education and Human Sciences at UNL. But I'm here today in the role as president of the Nebraska Association of Teachers Education, Colleges of Teachers Education, NACTE. I call it NACTE all the time. I never actually say the title. You probably are more familiar with Jenny Jansky from UNK, who often comes to your meetings. She is the secretary of our organization, and she is our liaison and she'll be back, so you'll see her again. But thank you for the opportunity. I want to share, just in the midst of all of the doom and gloom of the pandemic, which it's very serious. It has caused ripple effects through P20 education on a daily basis and continues to do so. But there are some celebrations that are happening, and we want to make sure that you're aware of some of those, especially as they relate to educator preparation programs. First of all, our P20 folks have been doing Herculean work to make sure that schools, colleges stay open every day safely for their students, staff, and faculty. And we are very, very grateful, and I'm very grateful as a parent as well as an educator. But it has forced a lot of us to be innovative and creative in ways that we probably would have had, but long time down the road had we not been forced to do that. And as a result, NACD is excited to just share with you that they've done some work with the teacher shortage, and were able to convene a teacher shortage summit last July. It was supposed to be in person, it was supposed to be bigger, it was supposed to be funded by a grant, and then the pandemic hit, so you just modify and adjust and you move on. But we convened leaders from all of the Nebraska education organizations in a virtual meeting to talk about the teacher shortage here in Nebraska. April Bushelman, who is the certification officer at Creighton University, pulled NDE data together, analyzed it, and was able to very clearly depict trends in hiring, in overall trends, as well as digging down into endorsement areas, so that we were all starting from the same data point. After that, we had a great conversation because everyone is doing amazing things, having tremendous projects and initiatives that are being pulled together to help assist in decreasing that teacher shortage. Lots of them had no idea what other groups were doing, the school boards to the Teachers Association. And so NACD's purpose of the summit wasn't to create a new initiative or program, was not to anoint itself as the leader of the teacher shortage, but to be the coordinating body so that we could all come together, start from the same data point, and put some things together to leverage our strengths and what we're doing now versus everyone working in isolation, and sometimes duplicating efforts. We were pleased with the first round. We are going to expand that conversation now to include a much larger group, including those building level folks. And the idea is that we will have frequent touch points where people can come together, and maybe there'll be some kind of common initiative that comes out of this. That's certainly not the goal. But if I know that there's some data collection happening at school boards, or I know there's a great initiative that NSEA is putting together, then I can tailor my efforts to either complement or pull them in as partners so that we can work toward this issue. And believe me, with the pandemic, it's even more important that we continue to have a strong educator preparation program in place, but an even stronger partnership across the state to address this issue, because it's just going to get worse here probably before it gets better. So I wanted to share that exciting news. We will be back to share ongoing updates about the Teacher Summit work, as well as any other initiatives, because we believe that educator preparation is a true partner with everyone, and in Nebraska we're really lucky that we all work together so well. That doesn't happen everywhere. So thank you so much for the time, and stay healthy and well.
Thank you, Sarah. We appreciate you being here. Moving on to agenda item 3 is the Commissioner's Report. Commissioner Bloomstead, would you give us a agenda overview and consent agenda process and whatnot?
Yeah, I'll do that. I will say, in case Marion Holstein does arrive, President Nichols, up to you if you'd like to allow her to provide. Yeah. So first of all,
yes, no problem. So ultimately, the Imagine Academy, which is formerly known as the Microsoft Academy, is a project that actually was started in the legislature. And so they were the ones that approved and appropriated state resources to fund this project. And essentially, it provides the curriculum, resources, and experiences for schools in Nebraska that choose to take advantage of it. A process of learning information technology skill sets. And so the Imagine Academy was a project that actually started about 5 years ago, and then we went through some budget cuts and there was a hiatus. And then 2 years ago, the legislature was able to insert resources back into the budget for NDE to carry out this project. And so that's why it's a consent agenda item. It's our annual licensing opportunity that provides access to the experiences of Imagine Academy, as well as the certifications that are associated with that students get at the end of taking the courses as a part of that work. So that's kind of what that is. It's an exciting partnership that we have, and we're looking forward to continuing our quest in supporting the educational experiences of students in Nebraska. I can. Good morning. So that is an excellent question, and it was something that was a bit of a challenge in the spring that we continue to find a resolution for. And so a part of the challenge is that many of the districts that moved to one-to-one maybe used iPads or Chromebooks. And so when they came to their IT Academy for Microsoft, the challenge was getting access to the right resources and software. So we continue to mitigate and work through different strategies, including virtual desktop machines, which through the internet create a real sort of normal experience, if you will, on the screen, no matter what device you have. So it is a challenge that popped up that was sort of in some ways ironic, that we were learning technology and had problems accessing technology, but we continue to find strategies to address that. That is a great question, and one that I failed to prepare for. Jackie Garrison from our staff at NDE has kind of been the target person. If I recall off the top of my head, and I can get you the specific numbers, there's around 120 districts at the K-12 perspective that have an Imagine Academy going on. And then we also have some community colleges that are engaged with the work as well.
Yeah, I didn't need an exact number. That's great that 120 schools are taking advantage of this. So thank you. That gives me a great idea. A lot of people are participating. Thank you.
This, when you first started talking, Dean, just sparked a great conversation we had yesterday afternoon when we were talking about competency learning. And we were talking about certification in certain areas, and it just, you slid into that conversation so well, because that's definitely on our minds as to what we're doing as we move through assessment, accountability, and accreditation. So thanks for the update.
Excellent. You're welcome.
Question, if I may. Dean, in regards to the relationship of those schools who are taking advantage of the academy, are they evenly spread out amongst the state, or is there more in the eastern part, more in the western part, or is it spread out demographically?
Yeah, so it's another great question. And in fact, what I'd love to do as a follow-up is get kind of a map and the numbers and some of the details associated with it to share with you. But generally, the academy is available to districts of any size. There probably, I think, are more of the mid to larger size districts that provide that as an option. But there are some smaller, what I would characterize as smaller, more rural schools that do take advantage of the curriculum and the resources to offer these particular courses.
Outstanding. Thank you, Dean.
When John asked that question, when we've gone into this COVID thing, we've had such concerns about the availability of broadband. Is that something that's affecting our small districts?
That is an excellent question as well. We know going into the COVID experience that we estimated around 40,000 Nebraska students did not have access to quality broadband at home. We termed it the homework gap, and we're working through some strategies to try to address that. COVID created a big light, shined a big light on that problem. And so we've been working collaboratively with a number of entities, including the Office of the CIO, Network Nebraska, our ESU community, and some districts. And we most recently partnered with Education Superhighway to help us connect and determine really the specific data that would allow us to understand the broadband access at the individual student level. We're in a data collection sort of space right now where we're focused on collecting digital equity data. This data will then help us really answer the specific resources or challenges. The governor also earmarked some of the GEAR resources, the governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund. And so there's a chunk of those resources, which were $16.4 million, that are targeted at providing internet broadband access for schools in Nebraska, both public and non-public. And so we're utilizing this data in the coming month to help us more specifically hone in on the strategies and approaches. And then one more thing that we're doing is, in fact, next week we'll be releasing what we're characterizing as a request for information. The RFI itself is targeted to the internet service providers, both wired and wireless, across the state of Nebraska. And essentially what we're trying to do is to capture the specific education home access pricing that they would offer. And so we can publish that in a way that's interactive with some maps. And so now we've suddenly have the data of where do we need internet access, and then what providers can give that access, and what is their price. And we can begin to have some strategic, thoughtful prioritization and resources of those, or strategies around those resources. All of that sort of are multiple moving parts, and would love at a future conversation to be able to share a bit more of some of the progress that has been going on in this space as well.
Oh, that's excellent, because I think, we've talked about this so much, and when we were talking about the competency piece of it yesterday, and some of the changes that we want to make and how students end up with their education, if you will, that we're working on it, and they're going to be able to take advantages of those things that they've never been able to take advantage of before, like this Microsoft piece and those kinds of things. So thank you. That's excellent.
Robin, then Patsy.
Hi, Dean. Robin here. One of the big topics of conversation of about a month ago dealt with compact. Okay, am I using the right term there? A lot of the superintendents, it was a 3-year program and that sort of thing. I'm assuming just from your response, your facial expression, that there is no connection between compact and Image Academy.
Oh, I see. I know.
You're looking a little bit more comfortable now, and I apologize for blindsiding you on this, but is there any connection?
So the short answer is there is not a direct connection, but what you're, I think, referencing is access to Canvas, which is the
Canvas,
learning.
I'm sorry, yes.
That's all right. Canvas is a learning management system, and so essentially it provides an online opportunity for courses, grading, information, curriculum, delivery of resources in a structured, kind of consistent way. And so early on in the response and using a part of our statewide CARES Act, the department partnered with ESU2 to kind of expand the option for a number of the districts that did not have a learning management system option available, to expand and create essentially the Canvas statewide consortium. And so by doing that, we were able to bring down the costs and negotiate some lower rates for schools in Nebraska, both public and non-public, to access and participate in the Canvas consortium that's run by the Educational Service Unit 2 region. So the Imagine Academy, though, is a curriculum that in fact could be sort of delivered through Canvas, but it is more of a standalone experience that is provided to students.
Thank you, Dean. And again, my apologies for using incorrect terms and then blindsiding you on this. But I know a month ago, Canvas was a big topic of conversation out there in our ESUs, and in particular with our superintendent advisory groups within those ESUs. So I was just wondering if there was a connection. Thank you.
Yep.
See then, Rachel.
Well, I'm going to ask you to make a guess on something, and I know that's not fair at all, but I can't think of anybody who's better to make an educated guess on this. You've been working on it a long time. I've run into your office a few times and said, go Dean, keep working on it really hard, having lived in western Nebraska. So at any rate, an educated guess, as educators, we're always looking for that light at the end of the tunnel. And the light I'm looking for as an educator is how much longer will it be before all of our districts and every kid in this state has access, and that's a guess, because we don't want to have another pandemic and go through all of this again.
Yeah, so there's two parts to that question. One is for students within schools, they have access. And so we're like one of the leading states in the country to have fiber high-speed access into school buildings. The challenge that we've continued to try to address is the homework gap and the access to internet or high-quality internet in a home setting. And that is the nut that we are continuing to crack, that we're continuing to find strategies to address, both in finding ways to either subsidize hotspots and access to where there does exist some resources, as well as finding deeper partnerships and relationships with the internet service providers to find out ways that we can create public-private partnerships to whether it's creating or supporting some elements of the infrastructure to help get the resources there as a part of that work. There's a couple of sort of tangential pieces. The governor had created the Rural Broadband Task Force, and that group has been significantly working at all aspects of the internet access in Nebraska, from the agriculture side, the telehealth side, as well as the education side. And one of the terms that's continuing to pop up is broadband for every acre in Nebraska, which includes every home as a part of that process. And so there's some continued experimentation as well as implementation of different types of approaches, whether that's through different wireless networks, different frequencies within broadband pieces that are a part of that. The last piece that I'll share is there's a number of pilot projects that are happening to help address this. One of an exciting one is using the education broadband spectrum in Northeast Nebraska, where we've been able, the reservation and schools and others within the Northeast Nebraska area have been able to take advantage of creating essentially their kind of education network that provides a wireless connection to schools and the homes within that particular region. And so they hope to have that up and going this fall, and have been working to create that as a model that we might be able to potentially replicate with partnerships in other places in Nebraska. So a long answer for we're making progress and doing so in a faster way because of the pandemic. So if there's one positive that possibly could come out of this is the heightened urgency at addressing this access issue.
Thank you, Dean. Thanks for teaching us all a lot with one question. Thanks.
Rachel?
This is really putting you on the spot today, isn't it? Now all of a sudden we all have questions, and thank you for everything that you've shared. And it's brought forward, and I'm going to start now with the one you just mentioned, several things that I think would be beneficial for us to get maybe a little more of an overview on at like our next meeting. But it is exciting, the Northeast Nebraska work that's happening with the reservation and the access that's happening to our schools in that area, like Bancroft, Rosalie, and Walt Hill. And I think understanding that in a little more depth as board members might be really exciting for all of us to understand what's working in that kind of partnership and how it's really providing access to students and families in that area. The other thing that came up when you talked about Canvas and kind of picking up on Robin's question, having a demonstration of Canvas might be advantageous so that if you have not worked with a learning management system before, you can get a chance to see one that's used quite a bit throughout Nebraska and get a little bit of an understanding of the learning management system, Canvas. In fact, I believe we have some schools, at least in my region, that use Canvas at their board meetings. So as opposed to using Spark, they have set up the use of Canvas for their board meetings. And I'm not suggesting we do that. I'm just saying I think that's another reason why it's value for us to maybe understand the multiple uses of a learning management system such as Canvas. And then the other thing we talked about yesterday, if we're doing a little bit of a tech thing here, we talked about EdReady and maybe a little bit of a demonstration of EdReady since I think, we've had a lot of changes on the board since the last time maybe that was brought forward, which has been a while back. So I would encourage to continue on this theme a little bit next month if we can find time to do so on some of these topics that are probably not going away, but truly are an example more of the transformation that will continue in education. Thank you.
Excellent.
No, this is ironic that I just killed my technology and I didn't want to go in front of the camera. Travis, could you help me? I lost everything. Technology, when it works, is wonderful.
Yes, indeed.
And I am so embarrassed, but I didn't know how to do that otherwise.
Go ahead.
First of all, I immediately started by asking and challenging you to find connections to things, and you did it right away. You didn't hesitate, so thanks for doing that. I do think what we just discussed is really important, and even last night when I was asked on the NET show about what we're learning in these moments and what makes a difference, it's these systems that we have, and we have a lot of one-off things that are taking place, that bringing those together in in a more meaningful approach will help our students and help our schools across the state. And so that's where I believe we do need to provide that leadership. And I do think Dean, if he can still hear anyway, the reality is we probably could take a look at what's happened with the GEARS Act and ESSER's funds, and really just kind of take an overview of that, and plus really have some vision for how those things could continue to come together. So thanks for the dialogue on that. I know that Ryan has a bit of a report, so I'll ask Ryan to come up. And as he's doing that, I just want to recognize Ryan and Andrea and Travis and Drew and I know Laura and others that have provided really the backbone of our abilities to meet in this setting and to do it safely. And I'm very grateful for all of your efforts, and I just wanted to be able to publicly thank you. And at some point in time, I always anticipate that we'll find the right moments to do that, but every moment's the right moment to thank you. So thanks again, Ryan, and thanks for the efforts that are underway for the board.
Yeah, we're glad to be of service, and I'm grateful to have good folks to work with to make that happen. I wanted to draw your attention to a few topics, in particular around your policy role as state board members for the state school-wide system of education. And I think a couple of resources for that are your membership in NASB, the National Association of State Boards of Education, and then our state involvement with the Education Commission of the States, ECS. And so a couple things come to mind that I want to draw your attention to, and I've emailed you about these, but I think a good opportunity to mention it as well. So we've talked about the NASB conference coming up, and the registration's open for that, and it's a virtual event, October 20th through the 23rd. There is a fee associated with that, and I can assure you that there's plenty of funds available in your budget for all of you to attend that. And it's considered an in-state event because you don't have to go anywhere, right? So you don't need special approval for it. It's covered under your in-state travel policy. And so work with your person, Laura or Andrea, to sign up for that. Also, this week came out from NASB information about the new member institute. And so many of you attended that when you first became board members, and that's typically held in June, and it wasn't this year, but it's being held on the 20th, on October 20th, like on the first day of the conference. And as I read the invitation, anybody can go to that, and it's free. And so I've always appreciated the information that I've got from that as your staff. And so if you're looking for another opportunity, the new member institute is free to you because you are a NASB member as a board. Also, ECS, Education Commission of the States, typically has their education policy forum in the summertime around the 4th of July, and I know some of you have attended that in the past. That didn't take place. Then they typically have a winter commissioners meeting that Commissioner Bloomstedt and other of our 7 ECS commissioners would attend. So it seems like they're doing a virtual event, though, on October 18th and 19th that anybody can attend. And in fact, for the folks listening, you don't have to even be affiliated with ECS. So a general participant, I think, can sign up, and it's free. Hopefully I'm not wrong with that, and somebody gets turned down. But board members, I would encourage you to look to the ECS virtual event, which I've forwarded to you. I think the benefit of ECS is that it is nonpartisan and non-political, and we really look to ECS as one of our first places for policy research. And so check that out. Speaking of NASB, then, Deborah, did you have a question?
One of the things I liked about attending ECS was the opportunity to connect with our 3 appointed ECS officials in Nebraska. And I just wonder if during that ECS conference, if we couldn't try to connect with those individuals, like in a Zoom meeting or something. I just think that connection's really important, and maybe just even a conversation about the events that we've attended, even if it's social. I don't know, do you think that's possible?
Yeah, I'm looking to the commissioners. So I think Deborah's question is about connecting with the other ECS commissioners, which would include members of the legislature, governor's representative, private or post-secondary coordinating commission. Thoughts on that, Commissioner?
It could be one of those things where we would try to organize some other meetings. And about a year ago, or maybe a year and a half ago, I think I was appointed kind of the lead for Nebraska. I forget the exact title that was bestowed, I guess, in that sense. But I think it's a great idea to kind of convene us and actually have some of that. We'd be cognizant of the number of board members we'd have at something, but I think that would make good sense.
Yeah, maybe it's not, and I also forgot that you're a member. So really, we're only talking about 2 more people, aren't we? Maybe we can just invite them to our board meeting or something. So anyway, we can brainstorm that.
I do think you bring up a good point, though, Deborah, too, about how because the commissioner serves on the steering committee and is that lead for Nebraska, gives us an opportunity to think about how we could engage those ECS commissioners on a regular basis, even if it was once a year. Okay. Back to NASB, I know you all get this in the mail, but I really have to point out the publication of the standard that just came, because it is so timely and relevant to the policy discussions that you're having, and it makes me think back to yesterday and some other pieces. And so the theme for this one is next generation assessment. Raise your hand if you've read this cover to cover already. Okay, then I'm going to keep going, because you need to check this out when you get home, and it's also available online. And Pat, thanks for bringing these copies so I could have my demonstrations with me today. One of the articles in here is 4 test questions for state boards, and it's questions around, I'll just read the first part. As the new school year begins, states will want a better understanding of the social, emotional, and academic learning needs of students so they can respond to them rapidly. So these 4 questions then can help guide decision-making during pandemic or unprecedented times. What is the purpose? So what is the purpose of the policy or whatever it is we're exploring? How should the data be used? Is the test fair and accessible, so specific to assessment? And then what resources and capacity building empower educators to act on data? I bring those questions up because in NASB's mind and in my mind, those are the types of policy level questions that are really great questions for policymakers like you to be asking. And so take a look at that. Take a look at that piece. Another one, breakthrough or breakdown, school accountability in flux. Is that not so timely for you all here in Nebraska? And so how did NASB know that was going to be important at this time? So again, take a look at that piece. Another piece that came with that is Start Strong, supporting early childhood education through policy. And Pat Tim contributed to the work on that through NASB as well. So really I encourage you to take a moment to look at those resources and use those in your policy decision making. Pat?
It was very timely also because our own state commission that worked for 3 years is now beginning to set the wheels in motion for action. Senator Steeners had a hearing. The Department of Education has a grant. So, you know, that 3-year discussion is now starting to now what do we do thing. And I thought that was very timely to be able to look at what other states are doing along with. And I'm very proud to say that I think Nebraska's kind of setting an example of the people that were on this committee.
I started calling on folks, Maureen, I guess, so Rachel's got her hand up.
Since we're kind of doing a NASB commercial right now, which I certainly appreciate as well, I want to encourage board members. I know several of you have gotten on to their office hour calls they've been doing, but they're also recording those and they've redone their website. So if you've not been able to, another great resource is to go to their website and really start to understand the depth of resources they're trying to provide through their website. And then if you get a chance to sit in on those office hours. Some have been really outstanding.
Here's my last item within my report for you, and that is on parliamentary procedure. You'll notice yesterday that we delivered to you the 12th edition of Robert's Rules of Order. Of course, I'm excited about it as a registered parliamentarian. Many of you asked for the In Brief, the 3rd edition of the In Brief, which is an excellent book, and I know you'll have that read cover to cover. But what I want to share about that specifically for you all is I really appreciate your interest in parliamentary procedure as we've continued to put those resources in front of you, and not so much from the standpoint of the meeting, which is important, right? Understanding things about main motions and discussion and some of those things. And most bodies don't get too difficult in terms of the types of motions they use. But where there is a lot of great information that I think comes in a parliamentary authority like Robert's Rules is information on bylaws and how your bylaws are structured. So as the policy committee continues to look at bylaws, also in committees and running committees and how that's different from when you're in this setting and less formal. And so if I were to encourage you to really take a look, if you're looking to put yourself to sleep some night, or stay up all night reading it, find those sections on bylaws and committees in your in brief or in the full text, because that continues to grow you as a board member, but it also continues to grow the body as well. So that's my report.
President Nichols, so.
Moving on to agenda item 4, the President's report. And I just want to first start off by echoing Matt's words on thanking the hard work of the staff. I remind you every week or every month of the staff that puts in so much work behind the scenes to prepare for not just our committee meetings, but for this meeting off of the regular area at the NDE site. It takes a lot of work. And so thank you again, all of you, for your hard endeavors. And I would miss names if I started naming them. But I'd also like to add that when we adjourn today, if a computer was already, a laptop was already set up for you, if you would start to tear it down, which would give our staff a little less time that they would have to put in tearing everything down afterwards. If you wouldn't mind preparing that for them, I'd appreciate that. I started off my morning when I turned on my usual Morning Joe if I'm up by 5, to hear the headline news that our President and First Lady have now been diagnosed positive with COVID. And that was sad for me. And I never wished that on anyone. And I want all of us to, and I know all of you feel that we need to wish them well in their speedy recovery and hope that their symptoms do not become bad at all. So I was saddened to hear that, because it is real out there, and we all need to be cognizant, and our staff make sure that we are as safe as possible while we're here. Thanks to Ryan for updating us on the NASB information, and just a reminder that the Early Childhood Institute is being recognized as an award winner at the conference. And I'd also like to share that at one of the last office hours that NASB had, I brought up information that caught the eye of Joey who works there on staff, and he had emailed me if I would be open to an interview, to talking about some of the things that I had shared on those office hours. So Joey and I had a good conversation last week, and a lot of it dealt around the board's thoughts and thinking behind Launch Nebraska. And I started off by talking about the resolution that we passed in March that was so timely and worked so well with all of the flexibility. NASB has really looked into our Launch Nebraska site and is very impressed with it. So I was pleased. I hope I did an okay job on answering any of his questions. I will send out to you, Tim is going to be recognized next week as an outstanding alumni educator at UNK, and I will send you out the link for you to register for that free awards evening next Thursday evening. I'll send that out to you early in the week, but you do have to register for it to be able to get the link to watch it. So I hope that we'll all be cheering from our own laptops. Pardon me?
You will hear about a minute and a half from me.
Okay, well, we'll look forward to it. Okay. I just want to say that, and I'm going to look back to my own board district, but innovation is continuing during this pandemic. And just this week, Grand Island Public Schools and CHI St. Francis have built a huge partnership in a medical academy. They're going to be using the 6th floor of St. Francis for a complete medical academy for the students to work in. And I think it's not going to open until like maybe 2022-23 school year. But it's just was amazing to me to read what has been going on despite this pandemic and the money that is coming from the community to provide for our students. And how, as I shared with Matt yesterday, you know, in the middle of this pandemic, the health staff that are affected, and how in the future that this could be a huge boost to help all of our hospitals and around for our students. So I thought that was interesting. Due to the pandemic, it's been a while since we have revisited having possibly down the road a student member on our board or an advisory group. Ryan talked to us about that. You know, maybe we could look at an advisory board for one student from each district. So I'd like us to begin that conversation again in the near future so that we don't put that off too long, whether we decide to do it or not. And Rachel, I know that's one of your big thoughts that you'd like to see, so just know that we haven't forgotten about it. And I really appreciated yesterday when we had our retreat on Nebraska Ready that the commissioner is looking at and wanting to put forward. I just really felt like the conversation, and I called Rachel last night to thank her, the conversation that came out from all of you was so good, and it's exactly what every board needs to do. And speaking of Robert's rules, I serve on a couple of other boards, and I just go a little crazy sometimes because Robert's rules just are not followed. To be able to get a word in sometimes just doesn't happen, so I appreciate everyone following. And that pretty well, I think, wraps up my information. Oh, don't forget to vote. One of your greatest rights and privileges that we have in this country is to vote in November, whether it's early or on that day. Please vote. And that wraps up my report, and we'll move on to the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Okay, moved by Pat. The second? Rachel. So moved by Pat and seconded by Rachel. Per board policy, there is no discussion on the motion to approve the consent agenda. So Andrea, would you please call the roll?
Neary? Yes. Kojons?
Yes.
Fricky?
Yes.
Nichols?
Yes.
Wise? Yes. Stevens?
Yes.
Tim?
Yes.
Witzel?
Yes.
8 yes.
Motion passes. Thank you, Andrea. Agenda item 6, standing committee reports. Pat, please provide a report from the policy committee meeting yesterday.
The Committee on Policy met on October 1st, 2020, and reports that it had an update item regarding the proposed state board meeting schedule for 2021. The committee plans to propose a 2021 meeting schedule with the full board next month, and as you look at it, the dates are all, at this present time, the first Thursday, if needed, for committee meetings, and the first Friday for the business meeting, and no meeting in July. But if you have suggestions or want to talk to the policy committee about that before November, please let us know. The committee discussed State Board Bylaw B2, board committees. We've had kind of some, I guess I call them parking lot discussions, because it hasn't been a full discussion until yesterday, about the board committees that we have, and we will continue to discuss that. You will find in Spark an attachment with some of the things with that particular bylaw that you can look at, and please do some thinking about it. And we want to remain as efficient, as effective as we can with committees. The next item, again, was a discussion on revisions to Bylaw 9, which is public participation at board meetings. And as you know, we have certainly changed our public participation somewhat because of the way we're handling our meetings now. We've never had the virtual before. And so, again, we can have a discussion about that. And that's attached in Spark, so you can look at that and see. Scott has made some suggestions, and on both of those, the suggestions are written in red. Rachel?
Yeah, and I'd just like to point out, Pat, thank you for your leadership on that and the discussion, in particularly on the bylaw B9 proposed changes for public participation at board meetings. I really would encourage all of you to take a look at it and touch base with Pat. Because it does spell out some different processes, thinking about the changes that we have in the world and using technology and still ensuring that there's access to public participation. And I think getting that policy moving forward to adoption sooner rather than later really is conducive in the changes that we've encountered in our world. So thanks, Pat, for your leadership on us really looking at change on that policy.
Yeah, please do look at that, because as you know, the first time we tried the virtual, we had some glitches, but we'd never done it that way before. And there are some rules that we have to follow when we have public comment, and to keep it orderly and make sure that people are heard. And so please look at that as well. And we have one action item that we'll get to in a minute that recommends that State Board Policy B5, board meeting notification for regular meetings, be approved at this business meeting, and that just has to do with reporting to the media and whatnot when we're going to have our meetings, and that because we are a public body, we need to do that. That concludes my report.
Is there any further discussion on item 6.1, bylaw 2?
Does anyone have anything today?
I am trying to use the equity decision-making tool that our committee and Patsy has recommended to review this item 6.1.b, and it is an exciting change for us because it really does focus on engaging a lot more of our public and making it much more accessible, our meetings, and giving them an easier platform rather than having to drive to Lincoln, so that they can be heard. I guess, am I understanding that it really, the big change is that we're allowing for remote access, right? Is
Right.
that, Is there anything else that I should, I mean, I've skimmed it. I'll read it before we vote on it next month, but I don't know, is there any?
There's been some guidelines, kind of reworded about what, on times, when, if someone sends something in written, when we need to have it. And we're talking about business days and 24 hours and things like that. And we also have talked somewhat, you know, with the glitches that we had last month, as to how people identify themselves if they're coming in through Zoom and what that entails. There's some suggestions on written, because we do have some written things today. And, you know, it's up to us to read those. We don't take the time here to read them aloud, but that's an obligation of ours to be sure that we read those and things like that. And so just some kind of guidelines and parameters. Rachel, do you have something?
Yeah, I just want to add one thing that I think it really, first of all, cleaned it up a lot and provided more clarity. And there's one piece that's being eliminated that some people might read it and think, well, we're trying to reduce public participation, because there's a segment in there. For a period of time, we tried a couple of times where we would do topical public information, I think is the best way to describe it. And I recall, I think one of my first or second years or whatever, I think it was during some of the social studies standards, that we said, okay, we'll put a public comment period in on our agenda right by social studies standards. It didn't work so well.
No.
So I think that taking that language out really just provides a little clarity, but someone might read that and think we're trying to reduce public, but we're really not. We're trying to provide more organized, structured approach around. So there's still the possibility for the same kind of public comment. If anything, I think we've expanded it by looking at access in a different way, and then cleaned up some language that we tried once and it didn't work and probably doesn't fit in the policy.
Well, and having both of those pieces in the policy was redundant, for one thing.
Yeah.
And one kind of went down one path and the other piece kind of went down another path. And as we kind of sorted it out yesterday, we realized that it was confusing to us. So we thought we really needed to straighten that out. So please look at that one, and please look at the board committees. Our board committees are built primarily at this point in time, and they have changed over the years. We're still doing the same thing primarily, but we're calling them different names, and we've combined them a little differently and so on. But it's very important that our committees reflect our strategic plan and the work that the department is doing, so that we are discussing the right things and clarifying. And we also have had some, and will continue to have some discussion about what the role of the board is with committees and what the role of staff is. Rachel?
Yeah, and I'd just like to add to that also, the discussion that we had on board committees, I think, was really a great discussion as well. And, you know, my personal view is I think the board committees are important, those that are defined that are there. I think one of the pieces of discussion that we had is that maybe it's important for us to think a little bit more about how we set the agenda around each of those board committees, but also how we structure those committees. We had some good success having some committees by Zoom. You know, maybe we don't need to think about board committees meet every month in the same way in person. And that's, I think, going forward, a great opportunity, from my view, not necessarily to change the committees per se, but maybe to change our approach towards the committees could be advantageous.
Does anybody else on the board or on the committee have any comments on what we talked about yesterday? Okay, thank you.
Okay, moving on. Pat, is there a motion on item 6.1C, board meeting notification for regular meetings?
I move to adopt revisions to State Board Bylaw B5.
Okay, so it was Pat, and was that Lisa? Okay. The motion was made by Pat and seconded by Lisa. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Andrea, please call the roll.
Neary? Yes. Kojons?
Yes.
Fricky? Yes. Nichols?
Yes.
Wise?
Yes.
Stevens?
Yes.
Tim?
Yes.
Witzel?
Yes.
8 yes.
Okay, motion passes. Thank you, Andrea. Agenda item 6.2, the Legislative Committee. Robin, please provide a report from the Legislative Committee meeting from yesterday.
Before I start my report, I'm going to ask Brian to please bring up, let's see, 6.2A, legislative and regulatory priorities. That will be an action item that we will be asking the board to approve. And so I want it to be up there. Plus, I want to draw some attention to that. Before I do that, I always think it's important to thank people, and in particular, I want to thank our president for her comments about our leadership, our president and the First Lady, and of course, all of those people who have been affected by COVID-19. And so I just want to thank you for taking that opportunity on behalf of the board. I think it's really a wonderful gesture. The other thing I want to do is I just want to thank my committee, Deb and John and Patsy, all those who are involved in that meeting, in particular Brian. I know Zainab joined us on Zoom, who were, I think I'm missing a couple, so I'm just going to apologize to those who I've missed. I have often wondered why Ryan doesn't join our meetings, our committee meeting. And I finally figured it out. He would be appalled by our lack of Robert Rules of Order following in our committees. So anyway, enough of those things. Okay, Brian, thank you very much. And I'm really gonna move along here. And I'm gonna jump around, Brian. You're there, aren't you? Well, obviously you are. Go to the regulatory priorities first. And the reason I want to do that is many times I have heard us, myself included, saying, you know, I think the legislature is kind of infringing upon our responsibilities. Well, we need to look at ourselves. And as Brian points out to us on a regular basis, this area, the regulatory area, is an area where the board has tremendous amount of flexibility on showing legislators where we have already acted and that they need not proceed on those particular areas. And so I bring that forth first because I think of the importance of our regulatory priorities. And sometimes we give up some of our ability to do the right thing educationally and give it to legislators because we haven't followed through on regulatory opportunities. And so let's keep that in mind as we go through our priorities. And I'll just go through this one real quick, and then I'll jump back up to the legislative priorities, if that would be okay. But these are things, these regulatory priorities are things that we're showing the legislature, this is what we're doing. You don't need to worry about this because we got it covered. Okay? So I just want to point that out. Okay, the changes that we are asking for, and you'll see the strike through on the early childhood education, the reason we've struck that is because we've accomplished it, okay? So that's why you see the strike through. Is there anything else there from any of the, as we're going through that? I don't know if there's any others that we have made changes to. Yeah, absolutely, yeah, and all committee members certainly please jump in here. If you could get close to your mic, John.
In regards to some of the points that you brought up yesterday, or emphasis items you brought up yesterday, that we all need to be cognizant of is this is a living document. It's not stationary, it's living.
Thank you, John.
Yes,
I appreciate that. Patsy, if it's okay if I identify these people, Madam Chair?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you, Madam Chair. All right, so one of the things that I think is really important for discussion in this is the 5-year-old discussion, and we discussed it at length about, I don't know if you can see that far away to read it.
Yeah, Patsy, that's coming up in the legislative
okay.
area,
All right.
okay?
Cool.
I think it is anyway.
All right, great.
And so we will talk about that. Yeah, go ahead, Rachel.
Yeah, and I'm going to come to your regulatory priorities.
Okay, yes.
And I'm going to be watching, but I think both the first one, accountability and accreditation, and college and career and civic readiness, you will be striking through next year. So I'll keep an eye on your progress, but I think based on our conversations yesterday, based on the work plan that you'll see coming forward in the next month, I really think we have made great progress in both of those, and so hopefully you'll see that those will be crossed off next year when you come forward. So thank you for keeping them on the regulatory priorities.
You bet. Thank you. And it's okay that you keep an eye on us. We might even be keeping an eye on you too, though. Just keep that in mind. Yes, let's see. Deb.
And staying with the regulatory topic, I do ask our teacher certification committee to really look at the educator prep certification regulations that we're recommending. We had a lot of discussions about pathways to teacher certification and decided, you know, we wanted to keep it general at this point, but it certainly is a high priority to be, putting in some effort on those topics next year.
Thank you. Thank you, Deb. Yes, Lisa.
When I read through this, it was, again, maybe last week, under the teacher prep program, in light of the presentation in our committee by Brad Dirksen about DLRT and diversity and training for teachers that are already in the classroom now, I wondered how could we list that or approach that under the teacher prep authority? Because NDE is already working on that, but if something comes up in the legislature, I think that because they're working on it, it should be a part of our priority.
Yes, Rachel. And make sure I respond to you too, Lisa. Make sure I respond to that.
If I can speak to that, I think the last two bullets, though, the language isn't quite the same. The intent really dovetails with yesterday's presentation. So I think that
It's already covered.
the intent is there. It's a matter of making sure that we keep those links going.
Okay.
So when you
Thank
read
you.
those last two bullets, it, to me, is pretty
The
integrated.
intent, okay.
Thanks for that response, Rachel. Lisa, I'm just going to ask that you send me an email to remind me.
Oh,
Okay,
well, it
please.
sounds like it's already in there.
Yeah, but I
So-
just want to make sure that I hear from you too.
Okay.
Okay?
All right, thank you.
is it okay if we move to the legislative priorities now? And Patsy, we'll jump right into your comments there about 5-year-olds. And I think we find that under early childhood, is that number 1? Yeah, thanks, Brian. Brian has highlighted it there. Patsy, go ahead.
Well, I can't read that from here, but the section at the end of early childhood, as I remember it, because I went through it very carefully, the 5-year-old goal that we had to make sure that 5-year-olds could still be involved in preschool. And I know there was some discussion about that with some other people. And we discussed it at length using outside examples and our own personal examples of why we felt that was important. But I think it's very important for us as a board to look at that and give us some feedback on what you guys think about that.
Yes, I think we have some feedback coming right now. I'm going to go to Pat first. Thank you.
This was talked about at great length for 3 years on the commission that I served on. And the commission was made up of 40 people across the state who represented early childhood in many different ways, plus the Department of Labor and other community entities. And because of the change of moving the entry date for kindergarten to, I believe, is it July 1st now? It used to be October 15th, and that was moved. And I don't know whether you remember at the time when that was talked about in the legislature, but that took 20 years to, at least 20 years, to get that changed from the 15th of October to the 1st of July. The people that I worked with for 3 years will have pushback on this, I can guarantee, because of the way early childhood education has changed. It's much different than it was. The 3- and 4-year-old programs, combining with Head Start, it's a much different atmosphere in early childhood now. And teachers, as well as others that we had on the committee, talked about the fact that we need to and we're trying to take children from where they are to where they need to be. And if you'll remember, we talk about that every day in 1st grade and 2nd grade and 3rd grade, that we need to, our children walk in the door and we take them from where they are to where they need to be. And I think this was brought up in a study committee or something a year or so ago, and I know Dr. Mizell's testified against it. So I appreciate the discussion, and I don't want to quell the discussion in any way, because I'm sure there are other things that people need to hear. But I do know that it has been discussed at great length, and there will be, if depending upon how it's presented, there's a possibility of some pushback.
Before we go to Lisa, I just want to comment on what Pat pointed out. We had much of that conversation. I'm not sure as presented as eloquently as what you have just presented to us. And we mentioned Mr. Mizell, Sam Mizell, Dr. Mizell, and his opposition to it. Mm-hmm. And so we had a discussion, but right now, at least at this moment, it remains as a priority. We do appreciate the pushback and the feedback. And as John has mentioned, and I will summarize again, this is a living document. It might change. Good chance it will change, especially when the legislature gets into session. This might be one of those areas.
Well, and I think it's something that, as you just said now, it's something that is discussed and can be discussed. And there's no right or wrong necessarily, but sometimes when we have more discussion, we come up with more, oh, I didn't think of that, or oh, what about this? So I think both sides are open to discussion. But, you know, like I said, the commission that worked on this for 3 years was pretty adamant about what they wanted to do.
And I speak for the committee when I say, yes, it is always open for discussion, for sure. I keep ignoring you, Rachel, I'm sorry. Go ahead, yeah, go ahead.
Well, and I certainly believe it's important to gather input from a variety of stakeholders, but I think one stakeholder group should not drive a decision that might be in the best interest of parents and families within our state. And I put this on several years ago, and this is another one I'll be watching because we've not accomplished yet. And it came as a result of a constituent call in a small community in my area. And that constituent truly did an amazing job in articulating the needs of their child. And the needs of their child were around some developmental needs, certainly not a child that has a disability, but a child that has some, had some developmental delays, that a little more time in a 4-year-old program because of their developmental needs would be better served then as they transition to K and beyond. And I believe it's our responsibility to do everything in our power to ensure that we are serving children in the ways that best meet their needs. And I think sometimes we forget that, and that we put processes or beliefs or what we believe are general best practices above individual needs. As an advocate for special education, as a previous special education teacher working certainly and a special ed administrator with birth through programs for students transitioning out of special education post-21, I think this is one of the most important things that we can do to leverage meeting the needs of students. I think that this bullet was not about opening whole-scale opportunities for all kids to remain another year in a 4-year-old program or to leverage their ability to play football is the last thing that it should be about. But if a child has a little bit of a developmental delay, and particularly in areas such as language, that will impact them in reading, impact them in their success throughout their educational career, it is our primary responsibility as a State Board of Education to ensure that we are doing everything in our power to provide opportunity for success. And I think this is one of those arbitrary rules that limits opportunity for success when parents and educators know what is best and have their hands tied. Shame on us for not figuring out how to resolve this, and not by resolving it in an open door policy, but using what we know about multidisciplinary team processes that plan and meet individual needs without having to do an identification for special education process. So I think this for us is about forward thinking in meeting the needs of students from birth through their educational career. And so obviously I am passionate about this particular area, disappointed that we've not been able to get it taken care of during my time on the board, but believe strongly that this board will do the right thing in the future for the children in Nebraska, in particularly those children who are in that 4- and 5-year-old critical period of time that need some additional support in high-quality pre-K programs.
Thank you, Rachel, for your passion. Yes, and, I'm sorry. Yes, Dr. Bloomstead.
I think it's a great conversation and an important one, and actually gets me thinking about where we really need to be even on what we've talked about some yesterday, and Robin was the one to bring it up around early childhood and how to address Nebraska Ready in that sense. And I actually have a long history with this topic as well, by the way. in the sense that I was, certainly when I worked out the legislature, this was part of that topic. When I left the legislature, I had a daughter that was going to be turning 5, would have been kindergarten eligible in September, and when they moved the date back, I actually told Senator Adams, don't make me come over there and testify against your bill, because it was going to change that. But actually, it's about, I think, as Rachel's talking about, how do we actually understand kindergarten readiness better? And so there is an area, and as you've all talked, it makes me think about the moments in time where the department actually didn't provide the leadership to establish what kindergarten readiness was. And I do think that's the open conversation, at least when I've talked to Dr. Mizels and others that are concerned about what this means. It's really, the concerns are about the money that comes with that to provide access generally, right? And so we're fighting over a limited resource instead of trying to figure out a better approach to address the individual needs of students. And so I think, just listening to you, I think that's what we mean by this statement, but it has this kind of feeling we get bound up over the issue of 5-year-olds, where we should really be talking about readiness to advance and making sure that we're finding ways to do that. And so very, very good conversation. So open my eyes to a couple ways that we might be able to approach it going forward.
You make a very important point, because having been a kindergarten teacher, and we talked about this yesterday again when we were talking about assessment and all the other things that we talked about, is that this is something it's been defined more by age than it has been defined by readiness. I mean, the test that I gave to kindergartners that they could move on to first grade was laughable. It had nothing to do with anything. And now this has been a long time ago. But, and we talked about that with committees and a lot of things. We don't define things. We just say we want to do it, but we don't give a definition. And I think that would be where the door would be open to have more discussion.
Yes, sure. Rachel.
I really was going to try not to keep going on this. However, Commissioner and Pat, you bring up some points that are so important. And that's really what's important about this discussion. And yes, we believe that, and we know that schools take all students who come in at kindergarten. But when you think about the range of developmental needs that a high-quality kindergarten teacher is trying to do, it's one of the most important roles that we have, is what that kindergarten teacher is trying to do. And if we don't do all that we can to support our transition into K and then beyond, to have the backup solution to say, let's just keep that child in kindergarten one more year, which, Pat, as you were saying, you're looking at, do I make a recommendation for the kid to go on to first grade? Why would we not do that before the student enters kindergarten, rather than the stigma for a child to say, I failed kindergarten? So I think there's some things that we just need to continue to work on.
Pat, if you could get close to your mic, please.
I'm sorry. Back when I was teaching kindergarten, we didn't have 4-year-old programs. Kids went to Head Start if they had the income identification. It really didn't make any difference about any other things. It was more of an income identification with Head Start. But, and I won't belabor this. We can have lots of conversation about this later. But I think that's the door that you go through, is to talk about brain development and developmental readiness.
Thank you again to all for this discussion. I'm going to refer us to the very last bullet in the first section on behavior and mental health. A lot of discussion about this. The one that I'm going to just focus us on is the one you'll see underlined, and Brian now has identified on the big screen. Investment in coordination of social and emotional support for youth that have been impacted by isolation and other traumas during the COVID-19 pandemic. Anything first from our committee members? this was a, yes, Deb?
I just want to build on what Patsy had brought out as a reminder to us yesterday that, really, we do have as a priority already listed, the investment and coordination of behavioral and mental health supports. But we really saw this as a different kind of mental health support and one that really needs to be talked about and addressed because there are so many children that are being impacted by the isolation, from their schools and from their peers. And so anyway, so this was added on. Patsy, is there anything you want to? Yeah, okay.
I think it's important that we recognize that as we look back on this, the number one trauma, ACEs trauma of this period of history for children will be the pandemic. And so as we go back to classrooms, we need to be sure that that is recognized because we will have kids coming back with all kinds of trauma and a depth of trauma that we've not dealt with for a very long time. Kids who've lost parents and brothers and sisters and grandparents and family members, kids who've lost their homes because their parents have lost their jobs, so there's all kinds of insecurity there. And to expect them to come back to school the same children that we had before, it will not be. And so I feel like, and I think that, I believe, I don't feel like, I believe that we need to be keenly aware of this and making sure that it's one of our goals that the legislature is addressing it by maybe more funding and help for teachers to do that. And I know teachers are crying out also for mental health help because of going back to school and teaching and all of the trauma that's arising to them because of that.
Thank you, Deb and Patsy and Madam President, and then Lisa. Okay.
I just want to add on to what Patsy was saying, that we may not be seeing anything for a while regarding this trauma or this isolation, but I believe down the road we will see it even more, simply because, number one, it's going to take a while for most schools to get back in place, but while Nebraska has not been so affected by the wildfires and the hurricanes and the flooding that's taken place this year during the pandemic, but we have had students, many students, whose families have been affected. Grandparents living in out of state that they haven't seen for months, that have perhaps lost their homes through flooding, through fire. So I think our legislature really needs to, and we can help them to understand the importance of, we've got issues here that maybe as we were growing up, we would have never thought this would have bothered us, but we are living in a completely different time, times that we have never experienced ourselves. And I can certainly say that while I like living out on the prairie with my 2 dogs and whatnot, I have felt the isolation more recently than whatnot. And it's not because it's not going to affect me traumatically, but yeah, when I think about going to my nephew's wedding next weekend, I'm not sure I really want to go. And several months ago, a year ago, I would have never thought I'd ever felt like that. But yeah, I don't know if I really want to get out and about anymore. And that's not healthy either, to be feeling that way. But we need to let our legislators realize we have to invest in our children in many, many different ways.
Thank you. Lisa?
First of all, I want to thank the committee for making this separate from the general needs of mental health, which is really, really important. This is more of an immediacy that I think the legislators need to understand that funding will be needed, extra funding, and kids can't learn well when they're suffering from mental health issues, trauma, and like you all mentioned, the things that sometimes we forget they're experiencing while they're at home. So thank you all for talking about it and recognizing that now they need that immediate help. And like you said, some of it we won't see until they come back full in person throughout the state in more schools. So thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. I think that.
Robin?
Yes.
I'd just like to add,
Yes.
we have addressed the students here, but I also want to address the educators. Those people working front line with these students, they are being affected immensely with the workload that they have put on them. So I think that needs to all be, I hope that that can all be part of this general statement here, that our educators as well as our students, that there will be an investment.
Excellent reminder. Anything else from the committee? Brian, I always like to give you the last word if you want it.
No.
Surprise, surprise. Okay, again, Brian, thank you so much. Yeah, John.
I just like to thank you, Robin, yesterday for the way the committee meeting was, if you will, worked. I mean, everybody prior to the meeting had an opportunity to have their inputs in regards to what they wanted to, if you will, put for legislative priorities and the reasons why. And I thought it was interesting that we had the opportunity when we point by point for everybody's inputs, and that each was addressed accordingly. Some were just out in left field, some were right on the money, but everybody had an opportunity to say their piece. And this is where we are today, thanks to you, Robin. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Appreciate that. Is it time now for my
Okay,
motion, or do you want to?
Robin, do you have a motion on the 21-22 legislative priorities?
Yes, Madam Chair. I move to adopt the legislative and regulatory priorities document as attached in Spark.
Is there a second? Who was that? Deb? So the motion was made by Robin and seconded by Deborah. Is there any further discussion on this motion? Seeing none, Andrea, please call the roll.
Neary? Kojons?
Yes.
Fricky? Nichols?
Yes.
Wise? Yes. Stevens?
Yes.
Tim? Yes. Witzel? Yes. 8 yes.
Motion passes. Thank you to all of the legislative committee and their work. It is now 10:40, and we are going to take right at a 10-minute break. Okay, agenda item 6.3. Pat, would you provide a report from the Commissioner Appraisal Committee?
The Commissioners' Appraisal Committee did not meet this month. You will be receiving in your, Matt, what do you put that in, Spark? Your report?
I'll email it to you.
Okay. You will be receiving his quarterly report, and so please look that over. We are planning a Zoom meeting in November, I believe the 16th is what we have down. And that's my report.
Thank you, Pat. 6.4, the AQuESTT Teaching and Learning and Serving Domain. Lisa, can you provide a report from that committee, please?
The Committee on AQuESTT Teaching and Learning and Serving Domain reports on 3 update items from our committee meeting. The committee reviewed the consent agenda item 5.2B, which was approved earlier in this meeting. The committee also received an update. Take this off. The committee also received an update on the content area standards revision process from staff, as well as information on the diverse learner-ready teacher. The DLRT is how they're referenced, network project through NDE. And from the policy information, from the information shared on DLRT, the committee discussed opportunities for policy revisions related to education preparation, such as Rule 20 and 21, and we'll be looking into that in the near future. And that concludes my report from the Teaching and Learning Committee.
Does anyone have any questions for Patsy, or for Lisa, I'm sorry? Okay, all right, moving on. 6.5, Patsy, please provide a report from the AQuESTT Students Success, Access, and Support Domain Committee meeting.
Okay, we had 3 major areas of discussion, and I think we went through them quite successfully. I'd like to thank my committee members and recognize them, John and Deborah and Robin Stevens. Okay, his name went right out of my head after I've known him 40 years. Yeah, okay. All right, so anyway, I also want to thank them for their continued work on LEAP, which is extra work outside of that. And Deborah, thanks for the plug about the new equity tool that you're trying out. The equity tool was presented as a final draft yesterday to the committee, and we asked them to use it a few times this month and try it out to make some decisions that they felt required equity or equitable thinking, and Deborah was doing that, and so it will soon be coming to you. So the Committee on AQuESTT Student Success, Access, and Support Domain met on October 1st and had 3 discussion items. The first discussion item on Leading for Equity and Excellence program, LEAP, State Policy Network. The committee was encouraged to, of course, use the LEAP tool that's been created. Also, these people were asked to attend a LEAP national meeting having to do with school funding, and for those of you who attended that, I appreciate it. The second discussion was the development of a position statement on human dignity. The discussion item was recommended by the policy committee and sent to us. They send us really good things to work on. The committee recommended to review the joint statement on human dignity developed in 2018 by the state educational agencies and decide whether to adopt some language from the joint statement or develop a new statement. And you might recall that statement being highlighted in the triangle, the equity triangle that we presented last month as one of the bases for our equity work. The committee also recommended to review the non-discrimination and equitable education opportunities in schools position statement to, one, integrate the human dignity language into this statement, and two, to redefine the educational equity, redefine educational equity to include all the new elements of equity and the core elements of equity. The committee was encouraged to provide their feedback on these documents by mid-October, so that we have something to work with at our next meeting. The last discussion item was about the revision of the coordinated school health policy to reflect the current framework of the whole school, whole community, whole child. Commissioner Bloomstead has been modeling and advocating for the framework, as evidenced by creating a new office of coordinated student support services for greater alignment, integration, and collaboration between health, education, and to improve each child's cognitive, physical, social, and environmental development. The committee recommended to have NDE staff review this statement and this policy and bring it back to our committee by January 2020 with revisions that they suggest. I thought it was interesting that one of the conferences that I attended virtually, the CDA conference, also was talking about this whole child, whole community idea as well. And so I think it's an important one for us to look at. I don't know if Zainab is with us today. Is she with us?
Yes, I am.
Maybe not.
Yes.
Oh, is
yes,
she?
I am.
Okay.
Good morning.
Good morning. Well, first of all, I wanted to thank her for all the work she's done and for partnering with me in all these efforts and with our committee. She's done an amazing job. And then I wanted to give her an opportunity to speak to especially the whole school, whole child, the last document that I referred to.
Yes, absolutely. Good morning. Can you hear me well? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. As Patsy mentioned, we have this policy, coordinated school health, and it was basically developed, I believe, in 2010 and revised a couple of times. And we are trying to align the work and how to combine both the whole child with coordinated school health to really emphasize on, as Patsy mentioned, for greater alignment and integration, and how collaborate between health and education. It's really, there is a greater emphasis on how to place all these areas in a new model: the social emotional climate, the physical environment, family engagement, community involvement, and all these tenets in a whole child, and the focus on the whole child. So we're very excited it's a systematic implementation of this model, and to foster and depends on upon an equitable learning environment where all the students and adults feel respected, valued, and really affirmed in their individual interests, talent, and social identities to cultural values and background. So we're very excited to continue to work on the whole child, as we Department of Education been very active, and we have received a CDC grant for 5 years, and we've been implementing the whole child in 8 school districts. And we look forward for an opportunity to report the outcome of and what we have accomplished in those 8 school districts, hopefully in the future.
Thank you
Pat.
so much, Zainab. Does anyone have any questions about what we've been working on or what we're doing? Okay, thank you much. That concludes the AQuESTT committee report.
Okay. Just to double check, is there any further discussion from anyone on the human dignity position for Patsy? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Patsy. 6.6, the Budget and Finance Committee. John, would you please provide a report from the Budget and Finance Committee meeting yesterday?
Comment on the wonderful and great board members that I have the opportunity to work with at the Budget Committee, Patsy Coe-Johns, Robin Stevens, and Deb Neary. So thank you very much. We had a very, very detailed and productive meeting yesterday. Thanks due to the part to our NDE staff that is, if you will, briefing us all the way with what is happening with the budget and any other regulatory matters regards to that. I'd like to recognize Gene Utterback and Bryce Wilson, who provided briefings for us yesterday. And is Commissioner, is Jen on?
Yes, I'm here, John.
Thanks, Jen. Jen, did you want to start out with the briefing in regards to, we had discussion items and one action item. So Jen, go ahead in regards to the committee's in-state travel and other discussion items.
Sure. I think we had covered the essentially the travel for September, which all looks to be at this point reduced just due to COVID and many activities that are occurring or conferences that are occurring virtually. In-state travel review all look to be appropriate and reasonable. And then we also had spoke on the deficit budget request. Do you want me to show a quick presentation for that?
Not just quite yet, Jen, if you would, if we could basically discuss the policy, the trust funds, and also the audits for Nebraska, discussion items, review of. Would you want me to take care of that?
That, or I'm thinking, Bryce, you might speak for the policy.
John, I can speak to those real quick if you would like.
Very good. Thank you.
So the committee reviewed both State Board Policy P8 related to the trust funds, went over the, which was referred to you guys from the Policy Committee. Since those trust funds go to the Budget and Finance Committee, you guys reviewed that. We talked about what trust funds those related to, and the committee had no concerns with any of the, with that policy at all. And so they were good with the recommendations from the policy committee there. On P10, which was related to the audits of the Nebraska Department of Education, again, was consistent with the current practices of what we've been doing. The committee seemed very comfortable with that and was supportive of the changes proposed by the policy committee for that one as well. So they were, I think, both of those policies, the committee seemed to be very comfortable with what the policy committee had referred over to you guys.
Thank you, Bryson. As an observation, is it safe to assume that very little to nothing had changed on those two?
They were very, very similar to what has been the practice in the past.
Thank you, Bryce. Did Jen want us to give a briefing on the deficit budget request?
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, ma'am.
Let's see here. I'm going to share my screen here real quick. Again, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Jen Udemark with the Department of Education's Office of Budget and Grants Management. We do have an agenda item today to authorize the commissioner to submit the department's deficit budget request for fiscal year 2021 on behalf of the State Board of Education. And I just want to thank you for the opportunity to just do a quick review, basically provide just some highlights or just bulleted type items from the deficit budget request. So the first thing with this deficit budget request, I just wanted to make note of the year. It's 2021. The last time we spoke, we had spoke on the upcoming biennial budget, and this deficit budget request will cover the current fiscal year, which began July 1, 2020 through June 30, 2021. I also wanted to make note of the word deficit. A deficit is an amount by which a resource falls short of what is required, and so the department will ask for financial resources that are required to complete the current fiscal year and activities that we have already engaged in. The upcoming 2021 legislative session will be the last opportunity or the last time in which the department will make an ask for this current fiscal year. Also, when we make a request, you will hear the term issue. An issue could be an increase or a decrease. And also, when we make this ask or request, we could be asking for essentially there's three different items we could be asking for. The first is spending authority, and this would be the authority to spend, or we are asking to incur the expense, but we are not asking for funding with spending authority. We may ask for additional appropriation, and that is an ask for a sum of money from a specific fund, general, federal, or cash. And the last ask could be for additional personal service limitation, also known as PSL, which is that limitation on salaries. This coming October 21st, we will submit our deficit budget request to the state budget division, and then the state budget division will then present it to the governor, who will basically review, make his recommendations through an appropriation bill. Then the appropriation committee will review and make their recommendations, most likely through an amendment to that appropriation bill. And then that would go to the legislative floor, where they will review and debate, and they will either make it so and make it law, or they will veto that bill. The next, I wanted to just quickly cover how we, the components of, or how we compile the request. We start with the 2021 base budget, and essentially this is the amount that the department has already been appropriated for the current fiscal year through Legislative Bill 1008 in the past legislative session. The amount that was appropriated to the department was $1.714 billion. We will take that base appropriation and then we will add our issues or our requests, which right now are projected at $100 million. And with those two combined together, we end up with $1.815 billion as our final request for the deficit budget, for the deficit budget request. And so that essentially is the, how we, the foundation that we start and that we build to with that $1.815 billion being our final submission. I just wanted to quickly note, and just a reminder, that base appropriation, the $1.714 billion that we start with, is just to take note that 95% of that is provided as flow-through aids directly to the districts, the ESUs, schools, educational entities, and clients at $1.6 billion. The remaining 5% is what stays, I don't want to say it stays within the agency, but it's considered operations. And that operations goes for the administration of, the operation of, and then also it provides additional resources directly to the districts, schools, and ESUs as well. And that's at $82 million. And then just as one last piece before we start talking about the issues, it's good just to remember that $82 million, I'm going to move on to the next slide, it's the programs that the $82 million does support. or the programs that are supported, the services that are provided. The operations supports K through 12 administration, followed by the vocational rehabilitation. It also provides services for disability determination services, the Social Security Administration benefits, services which support the blind and visually impaired, deaf and hard of hearing. And then the last two are our cash funds, the lottery programs you'll hear often, education innovation, as well as the Professional Practices Commission. So next, I believe we will quickly talk about the issues that have been compiled at this point. Right now, we've taken the individual requests and we have compiled them into issue packages. There are 3 issue packages. It's worked out very nicely this round. The first one is increased operational capacity that is supported by the federal fund. The second one is increased operational capacity supported by the cash fund. And then the last is future ready framework that is supported by the general fund. So we're going to start with the first package, increased operational capacity supported by the federal fund. I just want to make note right away that this is a request for spending authority. So again, we're asking for the authority to spend, we're asking to incur the expense, but what we are not asking for is any additional funding. That has already been awarded by the federal government. So the spending authority or additional spending authority that's being requested is about $99 million. It's comprised of 4 areas. The first component is an ask for the new federal grants that have already been awarded from, it could be from the U.S. Department of Education, could be from Department of Agriculture, Department of Health and Human Services. Awards we've already received, I think a couple notable ones to mention are the CARES Act program. We have the ESSER fund, which was to help prepare for and respond to the coronavirus. And that is an award of $68 million. We also have the GEAR fund, which provides those digital devices at $16 million. Another component of the increased operational capacity is a request for continuous federal grants. These are the grants that were awarded each year. These would be like the title grants, IDEA, Perkin grants. We have about $7 million in additional funds that could be with this increase in spending authority that could be provided directly to the school districts, schools, and ESUs. And then the last two, both are issues that are related to the disability determination services. They have been awarded new positions for adjudicator trainee positions and a security and compliance support specialist. And again, the additional spending authority would allow us to continue to hire those individuals for the awards that's already been provided. The second issue package is increased operational capacity that is supported by the cash fund. And these I've just broken out because it's good to see what is going through the cash fund, what's going through the federal fund. Again, this is a issue that is for the spending authority. There's no funding request here, just the ability to incur that expense. And this one is for almost $900,000. And that $900,000 essentially would support, the first is for additional PSL for the Professional Practice Commission. And this is just an increased cost in contracts of $1,000. So not substantial, but still the process that we need to go through to get that additional spending authority is through legislature. So that is on here. And then the second is the ability to execute our Youth Rehabilitation and Treatment Center contract with DHHS. The NDE oversees and administers the schools and education programs operated by the YRTC. At this point in time, again, this is not a request for funding. What it is more of an accounting process. We need the ability for DHHS to provide the funding for the services that we're providing. So without this increase, we would not be able to keep the cash flow of funds. And so that is the increased operational capacity for the cash fund. The last package is Future Ready Framework. Now I have turned this one to green because it is not because it's general funds, but because this is an ask for the spending authority and it is an ask for additional appropriation. The ask is for $700,000. The $700,000 would support agency-wide support and services for operations and contractual services. The Future Ready Framework is essentially to provide basically supporting and setting expectations for the future. We've already engaged in activities where we're building that foundation, building a foundation for the future. That future then, with this foundation, will allow us to address race inequity, education improvement, as well as at-risk populations. Currently, this ask would support the hierarchy of digital learning needs. This is an entire foundation of, digital access, digital devices, all the way to resources after that. We have Launch Nebraska, which sets forth a set of shared priorities and action approaches, opportunities, and resources to support Nebraska school systems as it relates to COVID. And last is Launch the NDE, which continues to transition and provide a safe and productive environment for our staff, while we are also assessing future facility planning and needs. And so this, again, is $750,000 in support to support work that's already in progress, but is an ask for the spending authority and the funding. The last piece I have here is it just wouldn't be right to talk about budget without having one table that we'd look at. So what you see in the upper left is what we previously kind of had reviewed, which was how do we compile this deficit budget request. We start with the base appropriation, the funding that we've already been appropriated, that 1.714, the total issues that we just reviewed, which is the 100 million, with a total deficit budget request of 1.815 billion. The table below, essentially, the colored bars represent each of those issue packages. The first one being that operational capacity with federal funds. I think what's important to note, there is a breakdown of those federal funds, but to the right is the level of authority that we're requesting, the almost 99 million. I think it is important to note there that 99.5% of that 99 million will be a direct flow through to the schools and districts and ESUs, or it will be an additional resource to the schools and districts and ESUs. That only 0.05% stays with administration. The increased operational capacity under the cash fund, as we talked about, this is more of an accounting exercise so that we can continue to provide the services and receive the funding from DHHS for that support to oversee and administer the schools that are operated by the YRTC and the almost 900,000. Again, just an accounting exercise. But we do need to go through legislature to receive that spending authority. The very last one is the Future Ready Framework, and that it wasn't asked for an appropriation, so I did want to highlight that in green. So just to keep perspective, when you see this 100 million, funding is truly only tied to the 750,000 for the Future Ready Framework. The other kind of green square down here is just to kind of represent what that increase or change over the base budget is, a 0.06% increase. Over on the very right, under that 100 million in red For our total request, it's a 6% increase over the base budget that has already been appropriated to the department. For the most part, that kind of wraps up the deficit budget request. Is there any questions that I can address, or before we continue on?
Robin, go ahead, sir.
Yes, thank you very much, Jen. The 100 million, the legislature's appropriation committee will act on that. Is that correct?
So the appropriation committee, what they will do is they will review our request and they will make their recommendations. And they make their recommendations, most likely, this is just the most likely activity is, they will amend the governor's appropriation bill. After they amend that appropriation bill, then it will go to the legislative floor and they will continue to debate. They can throw additional amendments to it before they actually take a vote and pass the bill.
And then it goes to the governor.
You know what, you're correct. Yes, it will go back to the governor because then he then has the ability to sign or not.
And then can you give me a timeline as to when you think you will know about that, I'll call it additional budget authority, deficit budget request?
Sure. The high level, just very high level. I'm not specific dates I should know, but did not come prepared for that.
I'm not expecting a specific date.
So essentially, we most likely will hear the governor's recommendations around January 15th at the State of the State address. And we will see what has been recommended. That's most likely when we'll see that appropriation bill. Then typically, I want to say it's about the end of February where there is a meeting held which reviews the levels of revenues that the state anticipates. And with that information, then the appropriation committee will then do their review and make further recommendations to the governor's bill through their amendment. I want to say sometimes it depends on if it's a short or long legislative session, but somewhere in between mid-February and March, early March, that is then when the commissioner will go in front of the appropriation committee, speak on behalf of these deficit requests, answer any questions that they may have, and then typically, I would say late March would be where we, for the most part, we know at that point what's been presented to the legislative floor. There could be changes at that point, but we feel pretty good at that point to anticipate the future.
And just again, for emphasis, you are really only asking for a 0.06%, which is well below 1% more money, that's $750,000. The other money already exists of that 100 million that you are asking for.
Correct. Okay. The funding, the money already exists for all aspects of the 100 million. It's just the 750,000 that would be in additional funding.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robin. Any other questions? Jen, Bryce, thank you so very, very much for the more detailed briefing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh.
It's not directly related to the budget, but it was in there as far as treatment for the YRTC. I was wondering about the Geneva, that situation. How far do they have to go for treatment? Do they go to Hastings? Is it in Geneva, or do they have to go to Lincoln for their treatment? Because in Kearney, they probably have facilities, but I wondered where those Geneva students have to go.
I'd probably do a better job in a little bit different conversation on that, but as we build that plan with with them. There's actually a lot of moving parts there that it's probably better for, like, that actually gets very specific about the types of things that are happening for students around treatment, and so it'd probably be best to kind of explain that a little bit different way. In broad terms, can I explain it this way?
Of course.
You know, obviously there's conversations about where the YRTC will take place. I do anticipate there'll be some conversations when it comes back to budget. I don't think those will be coming from us, but I think those might come from DHHS and the governor about where to make certain investments for the future of that system, and we'll be close to that, but that won't run through our budget per se.
Okay, all right.
Now,
I just saw that and.
if
was
we could
wondering.
get back to the action item.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Okay. We do have an action item on the deficit request, and it is, I move to authorize the commissioners to submit the department's deficit budget request for fiscal year 2020 to 21 on behalf of the State Board of Education. Do I have a second? Second. Discussion? Hearing none?
So the motion was made by John and seconded by Pat. Okay. And is there any further discussion? Seeing none, Andrea, please call the roll.
Neary? Yes. Kojons?
Yes.
Fricky?
Yes.
Nichols?
Yes.
Wise?
Yes.
Stevens?
Yes.
Tim?
Yes.
Witzel?
Yes.
8 yes.
Motion passes. Thank you, Andrea. 6.7, Rachel, please provide a report from the Strategic Planning Performance and Improvement Committee meeting.
Thank you. First, I'd like to thank the committee as well, which would be President Maureen Nichols, Pat Tim, and Lisa Fricky. And I'd also like to thank Brad Dirksen and all of his work around Rule 10 and rethinking timelines and processes. What I'd like to mention, the committee discussed Rule 10, and there's really two areas of focus that I'll mention. The first area was clarification on our discussion about Rule 10, and moving forward, we'll discuss approval, accreditation, and accountability in the three different buckets. And the committee is recommending that we have three separate rules around those three buckets, that we think it'll bring more clarity to each of those rules and more transparency to the process. The second area of discussion that we had at a committee was around Nebraska Ready. And Nebraska Ready really, as a committee discussion, then as a full board retreat discussion, starts to intersect with those discussions around approval, accreditation, and accountability. And I'd like to thank everyone for their input around that discussion yesterday of Nebraska Ready, and thank the board for sending that to the Strategic Planning, Performance, and Improvement Committee to integrate with their work around approval, accreditation, and accountability. And I would like to ask any board members that if you have some additional thoughts about our discussion yesterday in the retreat on the concept as presented by the Commissioner of Nebraska Ready, that if you can email myself, the Commissioner, and Maureen any of your thoughts in the next week or so, because we will be trying to draft the concept out of that discussion from yesterday and try to bring something back to the full board in November to react to and to provide some input on. The committee will be meeting via Zoom prior to the November meeting, so we can try to have two things accomplished for our next meeting, one being a draft of the concepts around Nebraska Ready, and two, an updated timeline relative to three rules: a rule for approval for our public and non-public schools, a rule for accreditation for public and non-public schools, which would really be the same accreditation standards for both public and non-public, and then a rule for accountability, which predominantly would be for public schools. That concludes the report.
Does anyone have any further questions for Rachel? Robin?
First of all, thank you for the information with you and your committee, Rachel. My question deals with Rule 14, which is non-public, and Rule 18. And just in general terms, how does your proposed changes in Rule 10 affect those two areas?
I think it's a little premature to say for sure, but what I think the committee will be looking at, and I think Brad Dirksen will bring forward, is some recommendations around the concept of approval that would have a section of approval for public schools, a section of approval for non-public schools, and then certainly the potential of a section for our programs, which would be the Rule 18 programs and services. Commissioner, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think in part, just so folks understand, there's some other legal and statutory responsibilities when it comes to Rule 18. So I think we're primarily right now having to talk about Rule 14 approval, Rule 10 that's been accreditation, and moving us towards a position where we really have 3 separate rules as Rachel's described. But right now 10 is just really around our private schools, right? They're not required to be accredited. And I think what we're trying to do is discern what are the basic requirements for all schools for operation and make that approval and look for a way that becomes consistent and clear and transparent, I think is a term we've used on that front as well.
And just to add to that, Robin, we did just briefly discuss that yesterday, and so I do think, certainly Rule 14, but just taking a look at Rule 18 in the discussion, and then we can report back on that of the limitations of moving anything with Rule 18 into that, or the advantages of keeping Rule 18 as a separate rule, as the Commissioner mentioned.
Robin?
Again, just look forward to this discussion and wanting to make sure. We had listening sessions about Rule 10 and the input that we have presented, I think, to the strategic planning group. But I just want to make sure that that information is in the discussion brought forth. And if you don't have it, is it something that I need to get to you?
I think that we did some listening sessions last fall. We as a full board had some of this discussion before March. We will have what Brad has mapped out. There will be extensive stakeholder engagement processes in the plan of action that will come forward for these 3 rules. I think that you can ask lots of people across the state, and I think there's different input on 1 rule versus 3 rules. That's just a point where at some point we need to make a decision and move forward. And I think the overwhelming input that at a committee level we have received or heard is the belief that there could be more clarity in 3 separate rules, and in particularly non-educators may have a better understanding of, and local board members, of what is required statutorily is often an approval requirement, not an accreditation requirement. And by all of those items being integrated into Rule 10, sometimes it's difficult to understand what's an approval requirement that either we have imposed through our regulatory authority or the legislature has imposed through their statutory authority versus what are accreditation standards and school improvement standards that are important for us to move quality and opportunity forward. So I think where the committee landed is we believe that it will create greater clarity and transparency by having 3 separate rules and really differentiating in any of those rules differences that may be for public schools and for non-public schools. I don't know, Commissioner, do you want to add to that at all?
I'll probably only add confusion. That's what I do. No, I agree. I mean, I think the main point where I just keep thinking, and I call it, and maybe it's not the best way to call it, but kind of the check the boxes that are the responsibilities that happen on an annualized basis. And we're checking. Actually, one of them that's a big topic right now instructional hours actually fits into that. Like we require X number of instructional hours, and so that traditionally is kind of a check the box responsibility of the schools, and we look at that every year. I think what Rachel, has talked about, and what I think the committee has talked about, is accreditation is actually a bit more of the power of the board to set the vision and expectations on the processes that take place in schools. And and I actually kind of review the accountability piece as a bit of the outcomes and expectations also. But those things I'm gonna draw your attention to the missing link imagery, right, again, but between approval and accountability, that accreditation is kind of the process piece that helps schools improve, and that's our intention, I think, as we keep walking through this. So I am certain I added confusion to it, but it's helpful to keep talking through it, I think.
And just finally, I know this was on the front burner until the pandemic changed everything. And do you have any idea on a timeline or anything like that? And again, I'm not going to hold you to anything. I just in my own mind, so I kind of get where you think you're headed by when.
Right. Well, our original timeline had us being in a major draft input stage, and engagement sessions would have already occurred. The new timeline will be after my tenure, but I think the new timeline, by stepping back, it actually gave us an opportunity to really delve in a little more to the discussion of things like 3 rules. And I would guess that the new timeline looks like about a year out on where we're at, but with the team under the leadership of Brad Dirksen taking a look at now this truly in 3 rules, one of the other things we discussed at a committee level is we're not saying all 3 rules need to be done simultaneously, and so there could be a value of a timeline that differs a little bit between those 3 rules. So for example, maybe approval and accreditation timeline is sooner than accountability, because there may be some things in accountability as we delve into that, that as our discussion has been, that impacts assessment a little bit, that impacts ESSA a little bit. This may be an opportunity that we want to make some changes that might take a little longer to make if it impacts some of the processes around assessment or an integration with our accountability system tied to ESSA. So I think that's where we'll be bringing back some of that information in November. Our goal as a committee would be to have kind of a work plan that you adopt in December that maps out some of these more detailed pieces of what's next over the next year. Commissioner, again, is there anything, or committee, did I miss anything in that discussion? Lisa?
You had mentioned COVID and how that has set us all back, but I think there's an opportunity with Rule 10. There are a lot of innovative things that are working really successfully that we might not have thought about if it weren't for the pandemic. So it gives us an opportunity to rethink how education looks throughout the state according to fantastic models that are going on right now because of COVID. Not that I want COVID around, but if we can get something good out of it with innovation, you know, there might be a place for it in the new Rule 10 that probably won't be called Rule 10, so.
That's a good point, Lisa. Deborah?
If in the timing of this, and I know it's probably premature to ask this question, but I'm hoping that there's opportunities for us to be invited to listening sessions along the way, or have the opportunity to be hosting listening sessions with staff there. And I don't know if it's your committee that would be planning those, or how you would see that happening.
I think that's where